Section 1.1 covers life in the Middle Ages, and this section is designed to give us kind of a background for where we are in European history, so that when we start, we're just not picking up and we just know what's going on in the world, because how do you understand what's going on if you don't know kind of the background of where we were. So I'm here at the Casa de Osborne today, joined by Piper the dog. Piper, look excited. She's alive. Hopefully you got a view there. I'm not working with the best camera equipment, but we'll do what we can. So again, life in Middle Ages society, the Black Death, the invention of the printing press, fall of the Byzantine Empire, several things that we will get into today. So, the menu. What do you need to focus on the most? Social roles and hierarchy. That's kind of the order of where people are during the Middle Ages. The medieval patterns in marriage, work, and recreation, so how life worked. Socioeconomic effects of the Black Death, and the effect of the printing press and nationalist literature. Also talked about the fall of the Byzantine Empire there, but that's kind of to give you kind of a political heads up of where Europe is at that point. So, we'll start with Middle Ages society. So how did life work in the Middle Ages and what went on with that? So here's our general kind of view of manner life. So, I'm going to assume that you are not remembering everything that you did in 7th grade social studies, although maybe it's bad for me to assume that, but in any case, here we are. This is generally how Europe is set up. So you have a country, you got a king, and then the king is allowing these groups of people, powerful landowners called nobles, to own certain regional bits of land. So think if Madison County had a king of Richmond, and there'd be a noble of like Waco, or Kirksville, or Clays Ferry, or the different sections. And that noble kind of has his own power in that area. So this is what it would look like. He'd have his castle, and then you'd have the little village. Here you'd have the church, which would be a Catholic church. The serfs, we'll talk about serfs in a minute, their houses, the mill where you're going to make bread. And then you have the fields all around, the pasture land. And then you have this pretty horse and this weird-looking animal. I'm going to assume it's a dog. So that's kind of the setup on a map of how it works. And the relationship between the landowner and the serfs would certainly be a challenging one, because what you'd have is this landowner basically tell the serfs, hey, you can come and live on my land as long as you work for me. Gather grain or whatever, watermelon, avocados, who knows, but crops are growing. So basically, it's not slavery, but it's more of a glorified form, because these serfs here, these ladies and gentlemen, would not be allowed to leave because the noble needed them to farm. However, the noble did provide protection for the peasants or the serfs. We're going to use those interchangeably. He would provide protection because if he allowed them to go, we're not exactly talking law and order. If you're not a part of a village in this time period, you are in some serious trouble in terms of your personal safety. So protection's important, but you have to be kind of that agricultural yes man. So here we have the general social pyramid of the time. And you have the king, and you have these lords or nobles right here. So there really wouldn't be a lot of difference, even though you have the difference here on the chart. The king only had power because the nobles basically let him be king, and he was in a centralized position. But regionally, in the different areas of, say, Madison County, outside of Richmond, the king really didn't have much say. It'd be up to the nobles. You'd have the knights, who would be obviously, we know the story, kind of the deal with knights, but they would fight and engage military service for the nobles. And then you'd have the ones at the bottom, you'd have the peasants. So at this point, we're going to watch a short video kind of describing this feudalistic or feudalism style in Europe a little bit more. So kind of just to crystallize socially the structures that govern Western Europe at that time. And let's see if this works. Click, and yeah, here we go. Awesome.
The medieval way of life known as feudalism was based on the ownership of land, and feudal social classes respected how much land people owned. Royalty, like kings and queens, were in the highest class. After the noble lords such as dukes and earls. They were followed by the knights, who were followed by skilled craftsmen, who were followed by the lowly serfs who worked the land. Under the feudal system, people of lower classes showed their respect to the upper classes by serving them, and for their service they received rewards. For example, the lord of a great castle might serve his king by supplying him with knights and soldiers for a war. To show his appreciation for this service, the king might reward the lord with a gift of land, usually in the form of a manor, which was an important unit of territory in feudal society. A manor usually came complete with a large house like this one, several farms, and at least one village along with all the serfs who lived in it. The crops grown on these lands supplied the lord with his income, and the more manors he had, the richer he became. The serfs who belonged to the manors never got rich. They were at the bottom of feudal society because they owned no land. Serfs were not even allowed to move away from the manor without the lord's permission, because his wealth depended on the labor they supplied. The lord rewarded his serfs for the service of their labor by giving them a place to live, a share of the crops they raised, and protection during dangerous times.
Like people who would act in these.
Because serfs owned no land, they had nothing to pass down from one generation to the next, so their families always remained poor. In their manor villages, they were not even allowed to grind their own grain into flour for bread. Instead, they had to pay to have it ground at the lord's mill. In feudal society, even though serfs produced nearly all the food, did most of the hard labor, and were the largest class of people, they had few rights and almost no opportunity for education. As a result, it was nearly impossible for them to rise above the poverty that ruled their lives.
We're going to stop there. So, yeah, it just gives you a sense if you're a serf, you're stuck. And we talk a lot about, let's skip the nice part, we talk a lot about how in America, kind of the idea of the American dream is that you can kind of take yourself up the ladder, and there's going to be boundaries, obviously, but ideally you can do that. Well, in medieval feudal Europe, you couldn't do that. So this is another conception of our, sorry, I'm going to die here, of our social pyramid, where we have the peasants on the bottom, we have the monarch nobles. We'll talk a lot more about the church. They are up top. I want us, though, to be watching this group right here, merchants. So what you have with merchants basically are these businessmen who live in the cities at the time. They're very, very small towns and cities comparatively to today, but these are the men and women who operate outside of the feudal relationship, and they may have some sort of craft or business that they do, and that's going to be something they'll watch going forward to see how they might sneak up this table a little bit. So knights and vassals, we're going to look at that social pyramid a lot going forward throughout the year to kind of see how it shifts and changes. So life in the late Middle Ages, what do we got in terms of how people's lives work? Marriage. You get married because you like somebody, you love them. Not so much in the Middle Ages. That might have happened too, but if you were not married, then you were going to be in trouble because single people, you did not have, especially independent peasants that might have been living on their own land, which did exist. You had to have hands to be able to work the fields and the farms, and that means you have a lot of kids. You also will not see a lot of divorce because of the religious restrictions at the time. It's such a Catholic era, as your reading has talked about. Families living and working together. The work is at home. So imagine if you were in this time, you are living and working at home with your family. You never go outside, basically, of their sphere of influence. So imagine spending all your time with your family. Work basically is stuck in these agricultural cycles. Again, we're gonna look at merchants later, but in terms of these peasants and serfs and this feudal landscape, farming cycles, church rituals, closely linked, and you basically make only what you need: subsistence agriculture. Again, for serfs, you're working in the concept of the feudal system, so you may be doing a little bit more, but you're certainly not making this for yourself. As the video talked about how you were like, you couldn't even make your own bread. That's going to the noble for him to sell, and then maybe you get the leftovers. What do people do for fun? A lot of recreation is done communally and participatorily. So nobody's sitting around playing Xbox. Nobody's watching YouTube videos about other video games. People playing games. I mean, this is not happening. Fun is done in a group, and it's done by doing things, whether that's dancing, singing together, or whatnot. That's part of it. A lot of festivals connect to the religious calendar. We're going to see just the concept of how much religion is intertwined in early modern Europe in terms of the social life. The common people, archery, wrestling, bear baiting, it sounds like a bucket of laughs. All these things are very common. Alcoholism is also rampant because, for the most part, water is not safe to drink. Beer was the common man's drink. And from that, alcoholism, especially among the common people, was something that was rampant. Maybe in a different context than it is today, but it's something that alcohol was certainly, beer especially, a major part of their lives. So we have the year 1346. This is the map of Europe, politically speaking. We'll look at this map in class a little bit and kind of compare and contrast how it differs from today's map. But one thing you need to know here early is that in the mid-14th century, which we're dealing with the 1300s, so the mid-14th century, trade routes are coming in from the east into Europe. So from the East Indies, over here where we would recognize Singapore, Malaysia, India, Thailand, Vietnam, that area of the world, China, of course, trade routes, overland routes are coming from the East Indies. And in about 1346, they bring with them, via this road, or trade route called the Silk Road, they bring an unwelcome guest, and that is called the Black Death. You probably know a little bit about the Black Death, the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. We're not going to spend a lot of time looking at the grossy, that's not a word, the grossness of, that may not be a word either, the gross things that happen to your body and kind of the medical parts of it. But we'd have to note, first of all, that with the spread of this disease, it comes to 1346 and 47 from the east down through Greece and the Greco region of Europe into these Italian trading centers, Venice, Genoa, Rome. And then notice the spread by 1348. And then the disease has basically liquidated many populations in central, southern, western Europe. Not so much into northern. It doesn't really reach much into this area of Europe, but it does around the areas. There's some of your parts that are affected. These are called buboes, which are just little boils that come up on the skin. 2 to 3 days, you're dead. And death became just kind of symbolic of Europe in general. It became part of people's lives. I mean, for this disease to have gone through, it's something that even in the art that emphasized death, emphasized destruction, the mortality of life. Art will always represent what is common in that year, in that day, in that era. So note that in this time of the Black Death, people were comfortable with death in that it was even depicted in their art. So some of the results and consequences. Why did this Black Death matter going forward? Well, you lose a third of your population. Look around our classroom when we get into class, and a third of the people, 1 out of every 3, is dead. Some reports say in some areas it's up even over half. But here's our thing to know, the socioeconomic effects. So there's going to be less workers because more people are dying. So those workers that are left they're more valuable to people that need them. Whether that's a serf, whether that's a worker, maybe a pre-industrial factory, whatever it is, skilled labor, you're going to get higher wages because you're more valuable as a worker, because there's less of you. If there's a lot of workers, you can always just pay someone just this little because, there's all these other people out there that can do the job. If they're like, hey, I want more money, you just fire them. But here, there's fewer workers. You've got to make sure and protect them because your business, your industry, your farm, whatever, is going to be hurting without those workers. So because of that, opportunities for social mobility rise. There's not as many barriers in certain places because those old barriers, the people that were there are dead. So there comes, and you make more money too. Laborers, maybe you can get social mobility. And then we'll get into this in Unit 2. There is a major loss of faith in the church's ability to protect and shepherd society because there's all sorts of death. So your reading has talked about how the Catholic Church really is everywhere in society, and it is the guard, it is the social bulwark of things. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, Europe's in trouble. And it remains in darkness until we go about a century later and we have the invention of what's called the printing press. Now, Johann Gutenberg is the name to know. Around 1440 or so, let's keep in mind that the Chinese about 400 years earlier had developed something like this. What is a printing press? What is it? Basically what it does is it allows you to take printed materials and instead of copying them hand to hand, now you can print them in books. Okay, so books, pamphlets, posters, whatever it is, can be posted a lot quicker, printed a lot easier, faster, cheaper, and it allows then, and this is why it's so important, information to spread a lot more rapidly. It allows materials to be printed in the vernacular, or the native language. Most materials were printed in Latin. Nobody can read Latin, okay, except for maybe some of the clergy of the church members, possibly nobility. But now the common people can read things in the common language and they're spread a lot quicker. So it allows people, it helps in the sense that it's going to encourage learning, encourage discovery, encourage maybe bettering yourself. And when the plague goes away, okay, and by the 15th century, 1400s, you're starting to see the plague subside. Now people, maybe we want to do a little bit more with our lives, and the printing press allows that. You see some nationalist literature, meaning literature common to that country. So the Divine Comedy, Dante, you may have heard of Dante's Inferno. It's kind of a similar thing. Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales are printed. That's the English version. So we have literature that's unique to the place that it's printed. Not Latin materials coming from the church in Rome, but now materials that are unique to the place that they're printed. And people start to take pride in their own culture because they're reading, say, in England, about stories of these different kinds of people who are moving around the country, or Italian religious thinking. So it's whatever it is, wherever it is, it allows and spreads for that passion. Okay, and here's Dante's Inferno. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the scientific revolution, kind of the concept of hell. Last thing to talk about real quick as we wrap up is a political event that's very critical to triggering what we will call the Renaissance. It's the fall of the Byzantine Empire. The year 1453 is important. Before then, just a little background. So the Roman Empire, when it fell, it more or less split into two different regions. You had the western region, which was centered in Rome, which split and broke down a lot sooner, and that kind of triggered the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. But here in the eastern part of the continent, you had what became known as the Byzantine Empire, and that was formed and held in Constantinople, which today is known as Istanbul. So the Byzantine Empire lasts until the year 1453. Then you have a group, a budding empire from the Middle East called the Ottoman Empire. It is an Islamic, a Muslim empire, spreading through what we know as Turkey, and then in the year 1453, conquering the city of Constantinople. So the Byzantine Empire falls in that year. Now, why is that important? Well, it affirms to Western Europe the possibility of an Islamic invasion, which Western Europe at the time is completely Catholicized or Christian, so that could be problematic. But also what it does is it takes Byzantine scholars, people who are working and learning in Constantinople, to move and evacuate west and take their culture, ancient Greek culture, for the most part, right here, and take that to Italy. And at this time, Italy is starting to experience a rebirth in culture, learning, discovery, which we'll get into next section, called the Renaissance. So this is like a, let's say, a shot in the arm for Italian culture when all these Greek scholars, Byzantine scholars, come and introduce their ideas there. And they move west. So that's section 1.1. Again, most important things to know, as we're going to just go back, and I know I've gone a little bit over my time here, but this was quite a big section. Social roles and hierarchy during the Middle Ages. Know that pyramid, okay? Medieval patterns in marriage, work, recreation. Why did the Black Death matter in terms of social and economic roles? And then the effect of the printing press and nationalist literature. Really, all four of these things we're going to bring up again. Maybe not so much the Black Death, but certainly trends coming from it. All right? So make sure to finish construct your notes. That's section 1.1. We'll see you on the other side.